What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors comes face to face with a talk show host who refuses to show basic respect? In just 37 seconds, a simple interview question turned into one of the most shocking celebrity walkouts ever caught on camera. George Stephanopoulos thought he could push Tom Hardy around on live television, but what happened next left the entire studio in complete silence. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now because we're pulling back the curtain on Hollywood's dark side, exposing entitled celebrities and their shocking behavior the cameras never showed you. We've got the raw footage they don't want you to see, and you won't want to miss a single reveal. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts on this outrageous behavior. So let's get into it. Tom Hardy walked onto the Good Morning America set that morning, expecting a normal interview. He was there to talk about his new film, a passion project he'd been working on for 3 years. The studio lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and the panel was ready. George Stephanopoulos sat in the center, with Robin Roberts on his left and Michael Strahan on his right. Everything seemed fine at first. Tom sat down, shook everyone's hands, and smiled at the audience. He looked relaxed in his dark jacket and simple shirt, the kind of guy who doesn't need fancy clothes to look good. Robin started with the first question, something easy about how Tom prepared for his role. He answered thoughtfully, talking about the months of research he did, the people he met, the books he read. Everyone was nodding along. Michael asked a follow-up about the physical training, and Tom laughed as he described the brutal workout routine. The energy was good, friendly, professional. Then George took over. "So Tom," George said, leaning forward with this look on his face like he was about to say something really important, "let's talk about your past." Tom's smile faded just a little. "My past?" he asked. "I thought we were here to discuss the film." "Well, yes, but our viewers want to know the real you," George said. "You've been very public about your struggles with addiction when you were younger. Do you ever worry that you'll fall back into those old habits?" The studio went quiet. Robin's eyes went wide. Michael shifted in his seat. You could feel the tension immediately. This wasn't a question. This was an attack disguised as a question. Tom took a breath. "I've been sober for over 20 years, he said calmly. "I've done the work. I've been open about my journey because I want to help others who are struggling. But I'm here today to talk about my film, not to rehash my personal history for entertainment." George didn't back down. He actually smiled, like he thought this was all perfectly reasonable. "But Tom, you made it public. You wrote about it. You talked about it in interviews, so surely it's fair game for us to discuss it now. There's a difference between sharing your story on your own terms and having someone use it against you," Tom replied. His voice was still calm, but you could hear the edge in it now. "I chose to be vulnerable to help people, not so talk show hosts could bring it up whenever they need ratings." Robin tried to jump in. "Tom, maybe we should move on to—" But George cut her off. "I'm just asking questions that our audience wants answered," he said. "You're a public figure, Tom. You don't get to pick and choose what people ask you about." Tom stared at him for a long moment. "Actually, I do," he said quietly. "I'm a guest on your show. I came here as a courtesy, to promote a film that I cared deeply about. I didn't come here to be interrogated about the darkest period of my life." George laughed. Actually laughed. "Interrogated? Tom, this is a morning talk show, not a courtroom. You're being a bit dramatic, don't you think?" Michael tried next. "Hey, George, maybe we should—" "I'm not being dramatic," Tom said, his voice getting firmer. "I'm setting a boundary, something you clearly don't understand." George's smile disappeared. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Tom said. "You think because you have a camera and an audience that you can say whatever you want to whoever you want? That's not journalism, that's bullying." Robin put her hand on George's arm, trying to calm things down. "Let's all just take a breath here." But George pulled his arm away. "Bullying?" he repeated, his voice getting louder. "I'm doing my job, Tom. I'm asking the questions that need to be asked. If you can't handle a simple conversation about your own life, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." Tom stood up so fast his chair almost fell backwards. "A simple conversation?" he said. "You just told a recovering addict that talking about his trauma is part of the job. Do you have any idea how many people are watching this right now who are struggling with the same things I struggled with? Do you know what message you're sending them? That their pain is entertainment?" The studio was dead silent. The camera operators didn't know where to point their cameras. The producers in the control room were probably losing their minds. Robin had her hand over her mouth. Michael was just staring at George like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. George stood up too. "You're being incredibly unprofessional right now," he said. Tom actually laughed at that, a short, bitter laugh. I'm being unprofessional? You ambushed me on live television with questions about my addiction, dismissed my boundaries, and now you're calling me unprofessional? Nobody ambushed you, George shot back. You're a celebrity. This is what you signed up for. I signed up to be an actor, Tom said, not a circus animal for you to poke at whenever you feel like it. Robin stood up now, trying to physically get between them. Guys, please, we're on live television. I don't care, Tom said, but he wasn't yelling. His voice was steady, controlled. Somehow that made it more powerful. People need to see this. They need to see what happens behind the scenes. How hosts like him think they own you just because you're famous. George's face was turning red. You think you're better than this show? Better than us? I never said that, Tom replied. But I do think I deserve basic human respect, and you've made it clear you're not willing to give me that. Michael finally stood up, holding his hands out. Okay, everyone just needs to calm down for a second. But George wasn't done. You know what your problem is, Tom? You can't handle criticism. You can't handle real questions. You want everyone to treat you like you're special. Tom shook his head slowly. My problem? You want to know what my problem is right now? My problem is that I'm standing on a television set with a man who thinks addiction is a personality flaw instead of a disease. My problem is that you're using my pain to create drama for your show. My problem is that you don't seem to understand that words have consequences. Oh, please, George said, waving his hand dismissively. You're being so sensitive. This is television. Grow up. That was it. That was the moment. Tom reached up and unclipped his microphone. The sound of the clip coming undone was so loud in the silence. He carefully placed the microphone on his chair, then looked directly at George. I've grown up plenty, Tom said. I've faced my demons. I've done the hard work. I've rebuilt my life from nothing. What have you done except sit in a comfortable chair and judge people for a living? George opened his mouth to respond, but Tom held up his hand. I'm done here, Tom said. I'm not going to stand here and let you disrespect me, my journey, or anyone else who's struggled with addiction. You can edit this however you want. You can make me look like the bad guy. I don't care. But I'm not staying. Robin reached out to him. Tom, please, just sit down and we can start over. Tom looked at her, and his expression softened a little. Robin, you seem like a genuinely kind person, and I appreciate you trying to smooth this over. But I can't stay. Not after that. He turned to Michael. You too, Michael. I respect you both. But this, he gestured at George, this is exactly what's wrong with celebrity culture. The assumption that fame means you forfeit your right to dignity. George scoffed. You're making such a big deal out of nothing. Tom turned back to him one last time. Nothing? You think someone's recovery from addiction is nothing? You think personal boundaries are nothing? Let me tell you something, George. The world is watching this right now. Everyone who's ever struggled with addiction, everyone who's ever felt like their trauma was being used against them, they're all watching, and they're seeing exactly who you are. And who am I, Tom? George asked, crossing his arms. Please, enlighten us. You're someone who values ratings over people? Tom said simply. Someone who thinks shock value is more important than human decency. Someone who's forgotten that the people you interview are actually people, not just content for your show. George stepped closer. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Tom said. I know that you had a choice this morning. You could have asked me about my film, about my craft, about the message we're trying to share with audiences. Instead, you chose to dig into my past, to try to create a moment. Well, congratulations, George. You got your moment. I hope it was worth it. Robin tried one more time. Tom, if we could just... I'm sorry, Robin, Tom said, his voice gentler now. I really am. You and Michael didn't deserve to be part of this, but I have to go. George laughed again, that same dismissive laugh. So you're just gonna walk off? Run away? Tom smiled, but there was no humor in it. I'm not running away from anything. I'm walking away from disrespect. There's a difference. This is ridiculous, George muttered. Absolutely ridiculous. You know what's ridiculous? Tom said. The fact that you still don't see what you did wrong. That's the saddest part of all of this. The cameras were still rolling. Nobody in the control room had cut to commercial. They were probably too shocked to react. Tom started walking towards the edge of the set, and you could hear his footsteps echoing in the silent studio. George called after him. You're throwing a tantrum like a child. Tom stopped walking. He didn't turn around at first. Then, slowly, he looked back over his shoulder. A child, Tom repeated quietly. You think setting boundaries is childish? You think standing up for yourself is a tantrum? That tells me everything I need to know about you, George. "Oh, here we go," George said, throwing his hands up. "More lectures from the great Tom Hardy." Tom turned fully around now. "I'm not lecturing you. I'm trying to help you understand something. But you're not listening. You're just waiting for your next chance to attack." Michael stepped forward. "Tom, man, I get it. I really do. But maybe we can all just take a minute and—" "There's nothing to take a minute for," Tom said. "This is over. I gave him multiple chances to show some basic respect. He chose not to. That's on him, not me." Robin's voice was pleading now. "The viewers, Tom, think about the viewers. They tuned in to see you." Tom's expression softened again when he looked at her. "I'm thinking about the viewers, Robin. Especially the ones who've been through what I've been through. They need to see that it's okay to walk away from situations where you're not being treated right. They need to see that fame doesn't mean you have to accept abuse." "Abuse?" George practically shouted. "I asked you a few questions. That's not abuse." Tom just looked at him for a long moment. "The fact that you think that proves my point better than anything I could say." George shook his head. "You're unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable." "I'm consistent," Tom corrected. "I've been clear from the start about what I was willing to discuss. You chose to ignore that. You chose to push. You chose to belittle my boundaries. Those were your choices, George. Now I'm making mine." The studio was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Somewhere in the back, someone coughed, and it sounded like an explosion in the silence. George tried a different approach. His voice got quieter, almost reasonable. "Tom, look, maybe I came on a bit strong, but you have to understand, this is live television. Things get intense sometimes." Tom didn't move. "Things get intense, or hosts get aggressive. There's a difference." "I wasn't being aggressive," George insisted. "You laughed at me when I tried to set a boundary," Tom said. "You told me I was being dramatic. You said I should grow up. You dismissed everything I said. That's not intensity, George. That's hostility." Robin nodded slightly, like she agreed but couldn't say it out loud. George saw her nod and looked annoyed. "Robin, really? You're taking his side?" "I'm not taking sides," Robin said carefully. "But George, he does have a point about the addiction questions." George turned on her. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? I'm just doing what we talked about in the pre-show meeting." Tom's eyebrows went up. "You planned this? You actually planned to ambush me with questions about my addiction?" George realized his mistake immediately. "I didn't mean, that's not what I—" "You absolutely meant it," Tom said, and now there was real anger in his voice for the first time. "You sat in a meeting with your producers and decided that the best way to get ratings was to exploit my past. And you thought I'd just sit there and take it." Michael whistled low. "Man, George, that's not cool." George turned to Michael now. "You're turning on me too?" "Nobody's turning on anyone," Michael said, holding up his hands. "But you did kind of admit you planned this." "I planned to ask tough questions," George said defensively. "That's what journalists do." Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it at all. Journalists ask tough questions to uncover truth, to hold people accountable, to inform the public. What truth were you trying to uncover, George? That I used to struggle with addiction? I already told everyone that myself. You weren't doing journalism. You were doing gossip. George's face was bright red now. "How dare you?" "How dare I what?" Tom challenged. "How dare I call out your behavior? How dare I refuse to play along with your little game? How dare I treat myself with the respect you refuse to give me?" Robin put her hand on George's shoulder. "George, maybe we should just—" He shrugged her off. No, I'm not going to stand here and be lectured by some actor who thinks he's too good for a simple interview." "Simple interview," Tom repeated. "Right, because ambushing someone about their addiction recovery is simple. Because dismissing their boundaries is simple. Because belittling their feelings is simple." "I never belittled your feelings," George protested. "You told me I was being dramatic," Tom said. "You told me to grow up. You laughed at me. What would you call that?" George didn't have an answer. Tom nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." He turned to leave again, and this time he kept walking. George called after him. "You're making a huge mistake, Tom. Walking off a show like this, it'll ruin your reputation." Tom stopped one more time. He didn't turn around. "My reputation will be fine, George. I'm more worried about yours." And then he was gone. He walked off the set, past the cameras, past the crew members who were standing there with their mouths open. The studio door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any shout. For a few seconds, nobody moved. George stood there, his chest heaving, his face still red. Robin and Michael exchanged glances. The cameras kept rolling. Finally, Someone in the control room must have come to their senses because they cut to commercial, but the damage was done. The whole thing had aired live. Millions of people had watched Tom Hardy calmly, clearly, and powerfully stand up for himself against a host who thought fame meant you couldn't say no. They'd watched George Stephanopoulos reveal himself as someone who valued drama over decency, ratings over respect. Robin sat down slowly, looking shaken. Michael rubbed his face with his hands. George just stood there, still trying to process what had happened. "I can't believe he just left," George said to no one in particular. Robin looked up at him. "George, you admitted you planned to ask him about his addiction. What did you think was going to happen?" "I thought he'd answer the questions like a professional," George said. Michael shook his head. "Man, you pushed too hard. Way too hard." "I was doing my job," George insisted, but his voice sounded uncertain now. "Your job is to interview people about their projects," Robin said quietly, "not to weaponize their trauma." George turned to her, looking betrayed. "You're really going to side with him? After he just disrespected our entire show?" "He didn't disrespect the show," Robin said. "He disrespected you. And honestly, George, after what I just watched, I think he had every right to." The words hung in the air. George looked like he'd been slapped. Michael nodded in agreement with Robin, and that seemed to hurt George even more. "Unbelievable," George muttered. "Absolutely unbelievable." But it wasn't unbelievable. It was entirely believable. Tom Hardy had come to Good Morning America expecting a normal interview. Instead, he'd found himself face to face with a host who thought personal boundaries were optional, who thought addiction was entertainment, who thought fame meant you had to accept whatever treatment you were given. And Tom had said no, calmly, clearly, powerfully. He'd stood up for himself and for everyone watching who'd ever felt like their struggles were being used against them. He'd shown that it's okay to walk away from situations where you're not being treated with basic human respect. He'd reminded everyone that celebrities are people too, with feelings and boundaries and the right to dignity. George had tried to create a viral moment. He'd succeeded, but not in the way he wanted. The moment that went viral wasn't Tom losing his temper or breaking down. It was Tom standing firm, speaking truth, and walking away with his head held high. And it was George revealing exactly who he was when someone dared to challenge him. The viewers saw everything. They saw a host who planned to exploit someone's past for ratings. They saw a guest who refused to play along. They saw the difference between someone who values respect and someone who values drama. And they made their judgment. Tom Hardy became the hero of that moment, not because he was perfect, but because he was human. He set boundaries and enforced them. He called out bad behavior without losing his cool. He showed strength not through aggression, but through dignity. He proved that walking away isn't running away. It's sometimes the bravest thing you can do. George Stephanopoulos became a cautionary tale, a reminder that power doesn't give you the right to treat people poorly, that a big platform doesn't excuse small behavior, that viewers are smart enough to see through manipulation and cheap tactics, that in the end, how you treat people matters more than how famous your guests are. The whole thing lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish. But in those 15 minutes, everything changed. Tom showed the world who he really was. And more importantly, George showed the world who he really was too. Robin and Michael never forgot that morning. The way George had turned on them when they tried to defend basic decency. The way he'd admitted to planning the ambush. The way he'd refused to see what he'd done wrong, even after Tom had spelled it out for him. It changed how they saw their colleague. It changed how they saw their show. But most of all, it changed how millions of viewers saw celebrity interviews. They realized that just because someone is famous doesn't mean they have to accept disrespect. They learned that boundaries are important, even on live television. They understood that the way we treat people who are struggling or have struggled with addiction says everything about our character. Tom Hardy walked off that set, and he took his dignity with him. George Stephanopoulos stayed behind, surrounded by cameras and lights and an audience, but somehow more alone than the man who left. Because Tom had his self-respect, he had his boundaries, he had his truth, and no amount of fame or ratings or viral moments could ever be worth giving those things up. That's what happened that morning on Good Morning America. That's the real story behind the headlines. Not a celebrity tantrum, not a diva moment, but a man standing up for himself and for everyone watching who needed to see that it was possible. A man saying no to exploitation and yes to dignity. A man choosing respect over ratings, even when it meant walking away from one of the biggest shows on television. And that's why people still talk about it. Not because of the drama, but because of the principle. Because Tom Hardy reminded us all that day that we deserve to be treated with respect, no matter who we are or what we've been through. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away.